Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, and Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Doing well, ready and raring to go.
Good.
Our big snowfall has disappeared. It melted one day.
Yeah, I know.
But that was kids loved that.
Yes.
But we're going to talk about one of our old issues, and that is our foreign policy dealing with Syria mainly, and Russia. We have to keep an eye on the Russians because you cannot trust anything they say. But, you know, Putin went and visited Syria the other day and made an announcement, which I think caught people off surprise because they figured he was camped down there forever. But the report was that he was starting to withdraw to a significant amount of troops, that the war against ISIS is over and he's leaving. And this should indicate that they're moving toward peace and maybe there will be stability. But the problem with that is that our side, the American side, NATO, they don't want peace with Assad in power. The goal was to get rid of Assad. Now it looks like there could be peace, and it could be that ISIS is on the run, even though our government won't admit that. Well, no, we have to stay there forever. We have to fight them, and maybe that's the reason they didn't do much to prevent them from their escape, you know, from escaping from there. So here he is. We suggest the troops should come home, but it looks like Putin was the only one listening to us. He's taking some troops home, but wonder why it wouldn't be a good idea for our government to do the same thing. Why won't they listen to us? I mean, how many times do we have to explain to them that it's in America's best interest? It's putting America first. So, but we'll keep talking about that. And I'm sure you've noticed that Putin was in the news yesterday about bringing troops home, and it's not every troop coming home, but it looks like he's moving in that direction. It really puts a little pressure on Trump and the United States and the NATO powers.
Yeah, it really was kind of a victory lap for Putin yesterday. He landed at the air base in Syria, and he embraced Assad, was thanked by them. He met the troops, thanked them for their service, and said, okay, guys, it's time to go home. We've achieved what we wanted. I guess he's bringing home special forces, aircraft, military police, sapper teams, of course, leaving Syria. And so, of course, if it's a PR stunt, and obviously some have already gone home, but if it was just that, it would still be a very brilliant one because it just invites the comparison. We were invited here by the Syrian government in September of 2015 when they were on the ropes. They were on the verge of being defeated by ISIS and Al-Qaeda. We fought our way back. We've gotten rid of ISIS in the country. There are no significant territorial strongholds of ISIS, and now we're leaving. You know, at 2, Washington. So it's a very the optics are very, you know. Yeah,
but you know, our president is claiming total victory.
Yeah,
but he says it was all his doing, and that is a stretch. I imagine history will sort all this out, but even current events are pretty revealing that you know, Assad is there for one reason. Russia was involved, you know, and they rescued him for their special reasons, their geopolitical reasons, the fact that they have a base there and they've been allies. But Trump certainly is going to take credit for this. But not only is he going to take credit, he sort of likes the idea or is dependent on the idea that ISIS still is there. And that's the reason he's arguing he's not going to bring the troops home, because they argued that they brought the troops home. Obama brought the troops home too early from Iraq, and that's why the Al-Qaeda and you know resurfaced. So he argues that we have to be there. And what is he doing? Is he thinking about bringing troops home? No, he's adding troops in secret. Yeah. You know, we're not even allowed to know where the troops are. You know, we're still looking for those 44,000 troops. And one of the places they're going is in Syria. They're increasing troops in Syria. And it just doesn't make any sense if somebody's looking at what is in the best interest of the United States, having a strong national defense, promoting peace, promoting trade, for us to be obsessed with this idea that we are going to be in Syria permanently, even uninvited. You can sort of understand, you know, the logic. That's a probably a careless term, the logic of us being in Iraq, but it's a little bit different. Syria is really, really, not in our territory, but we should come home from all of these things. But Trump is doing this, and of course it bugs me all the time because it's in secret, and Trump admits it's in secret. It should be in secret. The military is in charge. They can drop big bombs. They don't have to tell us. They don't even have to tell Congress.
Yeah.
Congress comes up and they're surprised when they learn, oh, we have troops. We didn't know that. How come you don't tell that? It's sort of like what the FBI does, and they never tell. The FBI never tells the Congress what they know either.
Yeah, exactly. Well, people are going to say, well, what about Obama? Because you're blaming Trump. And of course, we have to remember that it was Obama. It was the Obama administration that brought the U.S. into Syria under false pretenses. Remember, it was originally to rescue an ethnic minority from a hilltop. And then they decided, well, I think we'll stay. Also, under Obama, they said, this is going to be a quagmire for the Russians. The Russians are going to be sunk into a quagmire. Well, it didn't happen that way at all. But you know what, I think the problem is the U.S. mission in Syria is an absolute mess because the U.S. went into Syria under false pretexts, just like in Libya, just like in Syria. And so now that they're sitting there and the outcome is not what they wanted, it's a mess for them. They were convinced that they would overthrow Assad, in which case the puppet government, I'm sure, would have said, you can have your permanent bases here, everything is fine. So now they're sitting there without a real mission, or maybe not. We can talk about that in a minute, but that's why it's a mess.
Immediately after this announcement, our Pentagon had a response. They say, you can't blame the Russians. We doubt they're telling us the truth. And I don't think it's my job or this program's job to decide exactly what Putin said and what Russia's doing and what they're saying. We have a pretty good idea what they're doing, and we happen to think they're probably a little bit more open than our government. But we should have a lot to say, and we have more of a prerogative of talking about our own government.
Yeah.
And this is what they're saying. Well, don't believe. You can't believe the Russians, but you can believe the Pentagon, you can believe the president, and yet they even plant seeds because they're not even admitted, don't they? Sometimes even hint we're not going to be telling you everything, and that means we're not going to tell you anything.
That's like with the 44,000 troops. The Pentagon said, "Well, don't believe us. We're not going to tell you the truth about it." But they do try to say that this is all a PR stunt. And now there's this whole after the fact where the U.S. and its allies are taking credit for the defeat of ISIS. The French foreign minister said this week that Russia was taking undue credit for the defeat of ISIS. It criticized Russia for partnering with the Syrian government and with Hezbollah. So the outcome doesn't matter, that ISIS is defeated doesn't matter. The problem is that you allied yourself with Iran and Hezbollah, and you shouldn't have done that. That's the idea. But the fact of the matter, especially to those of us who believe in national sovereignty, is the fact that the government of Syria invited them in to defeat terrorists, and they were successful.
And of course yesterday we talked about the need for more money in the DOD, according to the administration. But we don't even know where it's going to be spent, and they're not going to reveal. And obviously we weren't overwhelmed by finding out all these answers with an audit of the Pentagon. But we do know that we can suspect where some of these troops are, and there's about 10 countries where these troops might be. Several countries in Africa. Even now, we're generally not keeping troops in the Philippines. We've added troops over there,
yeah.
And also in Lebanon, we're putting troops. In Jordan, I don't know. They're pretty friendly. I don't know why we have to have troops in Jordan. They say that's for training. This sort of thing. But there's less reason for more training. But there's just no reason for the American people to believe that national security is dependent on what we're doing over there, and that it's more of a threat to national security. It's a threat financially, and one of these days the markets will decide that we've we're overstretched around the world. That's how this will all end. We will extend ourselves too far in as far as policy goes and ability to manage our conquered territories. We will also not be able to pay for it. And I see this whole system with a lot of cracks in it, the financial system where the dollar is being challenged, and in spite of all the euphoria with the markets, I think that's puff and it's on the surface, and it's a distraction from what really is going on, especially if we see this evolving and how we get behind the eight ball in places like Syria and others, and others gain a foothold in those areas. So I think we're losing, but we could gain by backing off. Is the way I think. We ought to defend this country, but I just think that we're less secure because of the policies that we pursue.
Well, Mattis is operating. The Secretary of Defense is saying we're going to stay in Syria as long as ISIS wants to fight, and we want to prevent the reemergence of ISIS 2.0. But the Russians who are there legally and the Iranians who are there legally as their allies, you're allowed to choose your own allies if you're a sovereign nation. Putin said yesterday, if ISIS dares raise its head again, we have two bases here and we'll come in and crush it. So that seems to be taken care of. So in the absence of that threat, what is the reason that the U.S. still has 14 bases in Syria and occupies a lot of the northeastern part of the country? Why is it there? And I would have to say it's really all about Iran. Yeah. That has a lot to do with it.
The perpetual war, and indirectly as well with Saudi Arabia. You're talking about Iran, you talk about Saudi Arabia too. So the individuals that are involved in this don't seem to be willing to change their positions. I don't think Trump is going to change his position. The military is not going to change his position. And I think they are going to be determined there to stay a long, long time. Another thing that bothers me about all this is Congress, when they really, really get pushed, they finally sometimes react. I think about the time that I was in the military and in the 60s where the Cold War was going on and we were losing in Vietnam. And then there was the resolution of us leaving and humiliated, and then the War Powers Resolution being passed in 1973, which was supposed to stop all this. Yes, we do have a constitution. Yes, we're supposed to declare war. But they think that, well, they don't obey that, but maybe they'll obey the War Powers Resolution. And the War Powers Resolution say that you have to report to the Congress where the troops are. Yeah. If you don't know where the troops are and you have thousands of troops, and besides the number of troops are probably less significant now than in the old days because they use drones and missiles and all kinds of sophisticated weapons that they can pursue war and intimidation. And also, if you mix that in with financial sanctions, because we're still able to do that, we're at war all the time. But the Congress has a hard time keeping up, and sometimes I think they're complicit in what they do. There's not many people in the Congress who are arguing against some of this because not too many people vote against the military budget. They support the military-industrial complex.
Well, the one thing that I'm sure you noticed, and I noticed the whole time that I was there with you, is when you look at what members of Congress and their staff read. It is exclusively the mainstream media. The mainstream media, Washington Post, New York Times, it always backs the empire. It always backs the prevailing foreign policy of the time, which is interventionism. They never, you would go in with antiwar.com printouts and be reading it. People would look like you were from Mars. They never see any alternate. They never see anything different. So it really doesn't surprise me that they wouldn't question these things because the media that's supposed to be questioning them doesn't bother.
So your argument would be that they're not informed. They're just informed with things that are not right or true. Yeah. They're reading the wrong thing. So, but they feel like they are. But it sort of fits into their philosophy too. And you could add to the newspapers, the certain stations. If you're a liberal progressive, you can get support for moving away from a progressive foreign policy, which was less aggressive. Yeah. But if you're a conservative, you can listen to the conservative station, and they move you away from a constitutional position. And then, of course, people get very, very upset, and they want somebody. We're sick of all this. Let's have somebody who's for America first. But then you come up, what does that mean, America first? Does it mean that we have to first, send troops to Syria to prove that we support America? Oh, the Syrians are coming. The Syrians are coming. They're going to attack us. It's so absurd on what we're doing that it's pretty amazing to me. But it's a lot to do with PR and control of the media and propaganda, and it's always the war propagandists. And if you think of the money behind this, which you bring up quite frequently, who are the lobbyists and where do they get their money? And these think tanks, where do they get their money? And generally they're from special interest groups. And this, the staffers looked at that too.
Oh, yeah.
Not only this is authentic information, but it's also authentic donations,
yes.
To their campaign. So there it is. So I was always hopeful and continue to be somewhat hopeful about getting information out over the internet. But we find that the internet is not exactly uncensored. There's some of the conservative libertarian programs on the internet that have a difficult time getting their message out, and it's more complex than the average person like myself in trying to get a message out, and all of a sudden there's interference. Why did that happen? Why can't we do this? Why can't we get our message out? And some of them we're blackballed on some of the issues.
Sure, absolutely. There is a real danger to this. You have ill-informed people, but there is a real danger in our lawmakers being ill-informed because they don't see the full context, and that's what we try to do at the Ron Paul Institute. But for example, I think this is a good example, and I guess this will be my final thought. But the commander of Iran's Revolutionary Guard said this last week, "No American soldiers in Syria will be tolerated. I advise you to leave by your own will or you will be forced out." And if you only listen to the mainstream media, you'd say, how dare they threaten us? We better go in there and take them out. But if you were to look at the broader context, we are there illegally. We have troops in another country that doesn't want our troops there. Those troops do threaten Iran because they're right there next to Iran. Can you imagine? We always do this, but if the shoe were on the other foot, and there were hostile troops in Mexico, we knew it wanted to invade us. They said on a daily basis we want to invade them. We would issue the similar kind of threat. But if something does happen, and I would say if the U.S. doesn't leave, something will happen. The clash will start there. Then it will only be framed in the Washington Post context, which is, oh, how dare they? How dare they attack us? Our base is there, without the full perspective.
And the way I see this is that the policy of interventionism in foreign affairs is endorsed by both political parties and the majority of those members of Congress, the majority of our media. It goes on and on. So it's a tough battle to fight. But eventually, though, people do wake up. It was tragic how the Vietnam War had to end. We finally had to back out with so much killing and loss of life and cost, which is still, people suffer from it. We still talk and see people who have suffered from Vietnam and Korea, wars that were fought that were undeclared. And here it's persistent. It's almost like if we don't have an enemy out there, we didn't take the advice of Adams and said, don't go about the world looking for monsters to destroy. Seems like we're obsessed with that. We have to have them. And if it looks like we have Al-Qaeda on the run and ISIS might be wiped out of Syria, we go and do things that sort of props them up a little bit. We have to have an enemy, just like after 9/11, the war on terror, persistent forever and ever, without even defining exactly how you can have a war against a tactic and exactly why people want to commit crimes against us. Not understanding that means that we miss the whole point. And that's the reason that we're every place, and we're going to be every place. We're not going to come home. They're not going to listen to us, and we're not going to have Trump say, well, we made a mistake. Putin has a pretty good idea. And he wants to work with us. So we think we ought to come home from Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan and the rest of the world. No, that's not going to happen. But it will happen, though, for economic reasons. And when that happens, nobody knows. We could have an economic crisis next month or next year or 10 years from now. But eventually empires end, and they end usually badly with the people who have been involved suffering from it. So the American people still have a long way to go to start paying these bills, because it's all been done on borrowed money and fiat currency. And that means there's a great deal of distortion in the world economic system. And when it has to correct itself, believe me, it's going to be a very big deal. So we would like to prevent that. We're not likely to be able to do that, but we are likely to be able to contribute to what it should be like and try to introduce ideas where people will, if they endorse these, that we might have a foreign policy that makes some sense. That's what we really need. If we seek peace and prosperity, that is what I would advise. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.